Okay, we're going to call the meeting to an order, but I'm going to wait for a moment until my clock turns to 2 o'clock. Okay, I'm at 2 o'clock. So we call the meeting to an order. Dr. Kobe, has there been any communication to the council or any public comment?
There has been none.
Okay. Okay, I'll wait for about 30 seconds to see if anyone wants to raise their hand or make any public comment or communicate with the council.
And as a reminder, if people want to make a public comment, the best way to do that is to write into the Q&A function of the chat, and then we will deliver it to the council.
So from the public, it comes to Q&A, not the chat.
No, because we're on a webinar function. So we are all panelists, and it just limits the ability of the general audience to communicate with everybody. So they have the access to the Q&A.
Either Q&A or they could raise their hand too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it looks like we have no comment or communication with the council. Next item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting from March 12th, 2025.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. Any comments? Okay. Okay, we'll take a vote. Vice Chair Meaner?
Aye.
Dr. Bonham?
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi?
Aye.
Councilmember Lee?
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu?
Aye.
So the minutes from the March 12th, 2025 General Fund meeting is approved unanimously. Okay. Okay, next item on the agenda is the review of the revenues by the Department of Taxation.
Okay, let me go ahead. Can you see that okay?
Ooh, it's pretty small.
It's pretty small.
But my
How about now?
I'm good.
Okay, so
Okay, yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Okay, great. This is the Council on Revenues presentation. So as always, I want to start off with the April numbers, right? So the April is always a very important month for us. It's the largest month in terms of collections. And that's because of the tax filing, individual income tax filing deadline. So I'm going to go over this. The headline numbers were at 5.1%, right? That's where we are with collections. If you were to adjust this for the large estate tax payment that we had in October, or payments, we would be at 1.1%. So lower. This is what's really driving us forward. I do want to highlight a couple of things about what is driving this relatively, these numbers. So first of all, GET is actually up on the year, 3.3. It seems to be increasing. So that is, as a reminder, that is probably our most important economic indicator in terms of like what's going on recently. So this, the April tax collections would be for March. I know a lot has gone on between March and now, but that is for March, right? Before we had Liberation Day and things like that. One of the big drivers that is bringing us down is low income tax, corporate income tax collections. And what you can see is if you look at the refunds, it's $120 million lower than it was. These are refunds associated with our tax policy, right? So we offer large tax refunds for the film credit and for renewable energy tax credits. And this is big. This happens throughout the year. We have a hard time really predicting when this will happen, but this is what's occurred. What you'll see, we talked about this in the last March meeting. They've gotten us slightly bigger than they have since then. The individual income tax is up 1.5%. to declared estimated taxes is up a little bit. Withholding on wages is up, but it's much smaller than it normally would be. So just as a reminder, because of the tax cuts, we have amended the withholding tables and the withholding requirements for wages. So we did expect this to be getting flat to negative going forward. So this is the fourth month that we've have adjusted withholding tables. And, you know, the refunds are up, but kind of where we expected. TAT is slightly down, but pretty close to flat. And so you add up all these numbers, and this is how we get 5.1%. If you were to adjust this, take out the state tax payment, we would be at 1.1%. Does anybody have any questions about that?
So the corporate refunds, the substantial increase over the prior fiscal year, yeah? Do you know more about why?
It's really hard for me to get in inquiry into refunds because they're so like unique to each taxpayer. So even if it depends on when they're claimed, right? So
Mhm.
even though, for example, we have a cap on $50 million a year for the film, or I'm sorry, let's not use the film credit, the renewable energy credit. Like I don't even know which year this is actually claimed from, right? So these can be like 6 months later, they can be a year and a half later. It just depends and is very hard for us to predict.
Dr. Kobe, this is when you release the money, right? The refunds you pay it up.
Right.
Yeah, so it's
This
a
is,
cash basis. But you're saying the claims could be from prior years, not
Mhm.
just necessarily the most recent years.
Yep.
Would it be from
Big number.
lower business earnings and they paid estimated taxes in and are getting their refunds, overpayments back, or is it?
That
'Cause
could
that
also
would,
be it.
yeah, 'cause that,
The reason why I would think we can have this here, let me go down to, this is what I wanted to show you guys. This is where we are for corporate taxes by month. So they're down in February, March. So it's one possibility is they are claiming refunds from each year. The corporate taxes are a little different because a lot of them file depending on their fiscal year. So figuring out if this is all due to large refunds due to overpayments, refunds due to just large refunds going out the door is a question. I would say, given the size of these refunds that are in the millions of dollars in a lot of cases, that is not overpayment. That is usually claiming
credits. Yeah.
a credit.
Is the PTE in this?
Right. So the PTE, it would be here. It would come through the it'd be paid in the individual income, corporate income tax. We did lower the threshold from 11% to your highest marginal rate, right? So that may be contributing to the low corporate,
Mm-hmm.
the lower corporate receipts and declared estimated taxes. However, if you were going to be claiming the refunds, they would be incurring at the individual income tax level.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Kobe, if it's like a partnership claiming the paying the PT or S corp, it would show up on the corporate category.
Right. The payments go into the corporate category, and then they will be yeah, they'd be at the corporate category. Now, hold on. This is a little complicated, so I want to get this right. They pay it in, they claim those tax credits, they get the federal, they can surpass the SALT deduction, right? Because that's why they're really doing this. And then they get a credit. They're supposed to also be paying at the individual level, but they get a credit for what they paid at the corporate level.
Mhm.
That's how it works.
So even like a partnership that is claiming like a energy credit, a renewable energy credit, would that show up in the corporate category as opposed to the individual category?
They're claiming the corporate credit.
Oh, it's like a partnership that's claiming the renewable energy credit.
It would
But I
pass down
think it
to
gets
the
passed through to the
individual, huh?
individual, right?
Yeah, I think it would
Individual,
go to
whoever's
the
the
individual
partner.
level, right?
Yeah.
Unless the partner is a corporation, then it would be
Yeah.
claimed at the corp. Okay, I think I understand.
Okay, so just to go over this, I'm going to go over how we are doing month over month for our biggest tax types. This is GET. So the first half of the year, we were, flat to a little bit lower. And then since December, we've actually been doing a little bit better than what we've
Interesting.
expected.
Yeah.
Very positive.
That's actually what we were expecting. I mean, we've been talking
Right.
about this for quite a while, right? With the even though it's a slow recovery for Maui, actually, so this is your last data point is April, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so it's still March activity, which we don't actually have. Yeah, we do have the March visitor count. Okay, thank you.
Right. And then this is the individual income tax. Again, the brown line is fiscal year 2024. We have it all the way through. The solid line is fiscal year 2025. I adjusted, so let's not look at the dash line just quite yet. So we were doing flat to a little bit better. And then starting in January, we've been slightly below that, right? We were expecting a decrease, right? We were going to adjust the withholding. As a reminder, the budgetary impact due to the tax cut bill was $240 million for this year, right? So what I did was I thought, okay, let's see where we would be if we just added the 200. I took the 240 million, and it's basically that's equates to $40 million a month, right? So I added $40 million a month, and this is where we would be without the withholding adjustment. And so we're, again, we're a little flattish, I would say, in the second year if we adjusted for that. And so we're having lower income tax or tax collections now, but we anticipated that, right? This has nothing to do with a big economic changes in our underlying economic economy. What we were expecting is the legislature passed tax law changes to lower tax collections, and that began January 1st, and that's what we're starting to see.
Do you think there's a correlation, Dr. Kobe, between that and the G being not too bad, considering inflation is decreased? In other words, more money in the economy, so people are spending more.
Yeah, I would. I'd love to hear Carl's opinion on that. I haven't really looked at the magnitude of the shift. I'd be surprised. Maybe it's a 0.2 or 0.3% increase. I don't know at most, but I haven't really looked at those numbers in terms of the magnitude. But you would expect some kind of more people spending money. Especially with this withholding, since it's only adjusted by like $50 every paycheck, people tend to not save that money and just don't realize it, and they just spend it. So that money tends to go directly into the economy, unlike for example, when during COVID, and we all got our COVID checks, most people take the $1,500 or $3,000, whatever they took, and they'll spend a portion of it, but they save the rest. And when it's smaller increments, they tend to spend it faster. So it is possible. I just don't know I haven't looked into the magnitude of the change.
So my guess is that the CPI probably explains a whole bunch of what's going on in the excise tax. I mean, the CPI inflation is still elevated, and through the first quarter of the year was up 3%. So even if people bought exactly the same things,
it would go up.
On average, our excise tax collection should have been 3% higher. And we've had some growth in in tourism spending as well. So I think that
But the prior years wasn't inflation higher, but the GE
Sure.
wasn't growing wasn't increasing as much.
Well, yeah, but it was being dragged down by lost visitor spending
Mm,
in a big way.
yeah.
So we've been sort of thinking about a story, pre-chaos, where what you had was essentially the drag from tourism was sort of going away as we sort of are getting back to some degree of normalcy, still not normal on Maui, but and so that wouldn't be a drag anymore, and then the sort of the underlying growth of the economy would really dominate.
Okay, and so just here's the general fund levels. Right, we saw the big spike in September due to larger state tax collections, and then we've been up and down, and we've been slightly below trend for this half or for 2025, calendar year 2025, as expected, right? So one of the big questions that you guys will have to answer this meeting is where are we going to end up for fiscal year 2025? We're at, just as a reminder, we're at 5.1%. What will depend is what are the May, June numbers, right? So to help you guys out, I looked at where we were last year and the type of growth that we'd have to see in May and June to get to the final general fund number for fiscal year 2025, right? So if you look at this table, what this means is if May and June collections were 4% lower compared to in 2025 compared to May and June collections in 2024, we would get a 3.6 annual fiscal growth rate of 3.6% for fiscal year 2025, right? And you can go all the way down. Conversely, if we had a 4% growth rate, we'd come in at 4.9%. Just to give you the last 3 months, we've been, this should be a negative. There should be negative 2.4. I'm sorry about that. The average month on month. So we're in this range right here, which I highlighted in blue.
So you're doing this month. When you say month on month, you really mean July of this year compared to July of last year.
Yes, May and June of this year compared to May and June of last year.
Okay. So I did the basically same kind of calculations, but was looking at how much we needed to collect for the next 2 months in order to hit our forecast, and then I compared that to a 6-month average of monthly revenue growth, and came to the conclusion that I wonder when did the spike in the estate tax happen?
September.
Okay, so so I need to use a different, instead of 6 months, use
So
a shorter sample. Yeah. Okay.
So here's general fund collections. If we used September, we'd be pretty high. I used April, March, and February. You could also include,
Yes.
that was a negative 2.4%.
So actually, the 6 month takes me back to November, and so we were bringing in 811 million a month on average, and we only need 804 million a month in the next 2 months to hit our forecast.
Yeah.
Which, I think that's consistent with what you're saying.
And June tends to be a pretty good revenue haul for us, right? Because the estimated taxes are due.
Right, but May does not.
May does not. There seems to be that we delayed collections a little bit in April, so some of that will fall in to May, but you know, at most that's an extra $30 million that was not included in April. That's moved to May.
So, Seth, you're not sharing any information about May elections?
No,
Too early?
like it's too early. Like
Yeah.
I don't look at the collections really until like the 23rd or 24th when things are in, or else it'll
Yeah.
scare all of us for no reason at all.
So we should get all of our reporting dates moved so that we have a full month of data before.
So you guys only have to cast
I
about
mean,
1 month.
yeah, exactly. That's just budget math, right? Shifting things around.
Yeah. And this is the, you know, here's your current forecast, 5, -2.3, 2.9, all the way across. This is your input mean forecast of 2.7, 0.6. This includes the tax cuts and also the GET, or the lower GET collections due to the exemption of Medicaid. Does not include the estate tax payments, right? That big bulge. So like if we were to add this model in, like the estate tax payment is kind of like a bonus that that isn't included in our models, right? So if you were to do that, you would raise this by like 3%, right? Because the 315 million is about 3% of general fund collections, and then you would lower this by 3%. And actually that gets you pretty close to your forecast if you did that.
So you're taking the estate tax out before you run the model with our main inputs.
Like, because our model runs off of our last full year of collections, which is fiscal year 2024.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not in our model.
Yeah.
And this is, I just show you this. This is the same thing. This is your forecast from March 12th. You know, it's 5%, then it goes down. This is the accounting for the state tax payments, the budgetary math, and then you guys kind of cruise down. This all includes the impact of the the individual income tax law. And
so Seth, where's the settlement with the with Plavix going? Is that going to pop into the general fund somewhere?
It would be, that's a BNF question, right? So it would show up on the, it wouldn't show up in terms of our revenues. It would show up in terms of like their budgetary math.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions?
No, it looks like we're close then, based upon our estimate before. At 5%. Yeah.
Well, I think the hard thing is that the last few months we have been below
Right.
the prior year. So
but we're collecting more than we're collecting more than we need in order to hit our forecast. I mean, on average. So that's the math I did.
Not if you average the last 3 months or the last 4 months. We are actually below, right?
According to my math, we're collecting we averaged 814 million a month for the last 3 months, and our current fiscal year to date revenue is, we're at what, 8.438 billion.
Just look at the change over the prior year, though. We can't assume that we'll have April again, right?
Oh, I'm not. I'm assuming we'll average.
I don't
about
think
the
average monthly collections is relevant here, because we know May is going to be low. June is, you know, I'm not sure that's a relevant number.
I don't know the second half. I mean, obviously April pollutes that number, but if you take April out and you do the whole year, the other thing that I think we may be missing is that the economy is actually we just got jobs data for April, and they were through the roof. I mean, Hawaii had the fastest job growth in the entire country in April. I don't know where that's coming from. It's not federal government because we're losing federal government jobs in the data. Actually, I think federal government was the only sector that lost jobs. We saw big gains in healthcare and big gains in hospitality, leisure and hospitality. So I think some of what we're seeing in the excise tax and the to a lot less extent the income tax because the tax law changes is actually some underlying strength in the economy.
Those were good numbers. It was good to see.
Surprisingly good numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very surprised. So, Christy, are you thinking more like 4.7, 4.6?
Well, going back to Seth's chart where he's looking at the potential. Seth, could you throw that up again?
Yep, of course.
Since the growth rate for the last 3 months has been minus 2.4, we'd be closer to a 4% if we use something in that gray range that is showing. And we'd have to have like a 5% growth or positive 4%, which is quite a swing from the last 3 months to get us closer to that 5%. That is our current forecast.
Nine point.
So isn't our growth rate, if you carve out the one-time large estate tax payment, that's about 3%, right? So, but that's
No,
on
it's 1.1.
well, why isn't 315 million 3%?
Oh no, that is 3.3. I'm sorry. I thought you said if you account for that, what would our growth rate be?
Yeah,
But that is about 3% of
Yeah.
our
but that's over a 12-month period, right? So I mean,
correct.
it's greater over a 10-month period. So without that, we've been averaging about 2% for the year, roughly. Without the large estate tax payment.
So
That's the 1.1, right, Seth?
this is
Okay.
this is 1.1.
That's
So
over a 12-month period, right? 12
no,
months.
this would be year to date.
Oh,
This would be
but the three,
July through April
but it's
2025
magnified, right?
over July through April 2024.
It's a 10-month. You're spreading the 315 million over 10 months, right? So in other words, it's magnifying the impact as opposed to 12 months.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and that's the reason why we don't have just a 3% change between 5.1 and 1.1 is
Yeah.
that 315 million would be divided over 12 months versus 10 months, as you were saying. That's correct.
And also the corporate refunds, the credits, you would think it'd be concentrated in the first half of the year versus the second half. Is that true?
I wouldn't say that's from my experience. It depends when they settle it and they release it.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily tied to, from my experience,
Okay. No, I'm just trying to understand if it's, Christy's mentioning, okay, we got these negative months and it's attributed a lot to these refunds. Is it concentrated one period versus the other? But if it's not, then, you got to.
I would think it's, it's not necessarily time, it's accumulated
Mhm.
period, and I think they're trying to settle and release the valid refunds, but it probably is also, it probably is a factor, is also probably the, it's impacted by things like the legislative session where some of the important decision makers are busy with the legislative session.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I'm still sort of stuck on, I'm not sure why I'm getting different results than what Seth has, but I switched to I looked at the average monthly collections excluding April and September. And that's roughly 750 million per month, which is about 60 million short of what we would need over the next in order to hit our forecast.
It's just
And
that I mean, it's not, there's a real cyclical.
well, I understand that's why I'm
Yeah.
averaging 11 or 10 months, actually not quite 10 months. Because I mean, and the noise that's in here, I mean, you're doing the same thing when you're using the growth rates. It's not any different. You're using year-over-year growth rates, and so, but the other thing is that the cyclicality tends to be in our favor. I know it's not for May, but it does tend to be in our favor for June. I'm not sure if it's a wash or if my
Yeah.
gut is that, I mean, my sort of gut is that the second half of the year is always stronger than the first half. And I don't know if that's just April and June, or if those are big enough to offset some. And actually, I think we certainly have had plenty of, in my recollection, big surprises in June. I can't remember if those are on average offset by weakness in May. And I guess the other thing that I'm sort of suggesting is that the growth rate, well, I'm expecting May and June to be better than the performance that we've seen in the previous year to year and a half.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Carl. The one thing you would have to do is you would want to incorporate the loss of the withholding, which is about 80 million for
Yeah.
the next 2 months.
Yeah. Yeah, because that didn't start until December or until January, right?
Correct. And that's our revenue estimate for the impact on this fiscal year is 240 million, which comes out to about 40 million a month.
Yeah, good point.
I think you're right, Carl. That second half is stronger, right, because of the Christmas season and also the April 20th deadline, among other things. That's when we got a lot of payments in. But
I mean, I wouldn't push that too far in terms of strength of the economy. Obviously, a lot's changed in the last several months, but if you look at sort of where tourism is right now, the advanced bookings numbers that I've seen suggest that it's essentially flat for May and June, and the passenger count data that we fortunately have back again now tells us that it's essentially flat month to date for May. April was strong in the passenger count data. Now, I don't know if that's tourists or residents traveling back to Japan again. And so it still fits the same, I think, the same story that tourism isn't going to be a drag that it was at the beginning of this fiscal year. So to me, that suggests that GET will likely continue to improve. I mean, honestly, I think there's a risk that our forecast could actually be too low for this fiscal year. You'll probably think I'm crazy, but
A little bit.
yeah. I mean, I guess I wouldn't want to make big adjustments at this point either way.
So
I think the forecast that came out of our model was actually I think it was 4.9, or I can't remember exactly, but it was pretty darn close to what the council forecast had. Seth, what's the model forecast? What did you? It's very, very close to our current forecast, isn't it?
It's the model forecast is 2.7, but that did not include the 3% of the estate tax payment.
Can I make just a couple of quick comments about table 3? That's our mean forecast, and I know I do this every time, but I think it might be helpful. I can put it up, or I don't know if I can share with the screen, or can you share it, Seth? Table 3.
Yeah, let me bring it up, or you can share it.
Okay.
If you got it on hand.
Yeah, I do. Oh,
I don't
no,
know if
it's not.
yeah,
It's
no,
not letting me share.
we are
Yeah.
into trying to project for current fiscal year, right? The general fund.
I'll get it. Just one second.
The reason I wanted to share that was just that I was a little surprised because my forecast is the highest amongst the council, which really surprised me, because I actually think our forecast is pretty pessimistic. But it's really our forecast is more pessimistic, but doesn't start until next fiscal year, right? Most of the weaknesses. But the thing that was the most different between the forecast I submitted and the forecast the council submitted is, once again, construction put in place. And so I was thinking, Seth, that maybe one thing that might help with that is in the data that we get from tax, if we can include the year to date. I don't think we have the year to date or the fiscal year to date number for construction, because we have data for construction through December, and the growth rate through December is something like 21%. And so in order to get this council mean, it's the third line in panel B, in order to get to 9%, we have to have no growth in construction at all for the second half of the fiscal year, which is, borderline impossible. I mean, it's possible, right? It's still a growth rate, but it's inconsistent with the construction job numbers, which also popped a little bit in April, and and are still rising. And so that's really, and actually the council mean forecast for everything else was higher than the one I submitted. So the entire difference in the forecast that came out of the model for my inputs was 4.5%. So the only thing 4.2%, whereas the mean was 2.7. So the only thing driving that was construction. That just one, and then the other thing that I noticed is that the council mean forecast for personal income, if you look at those numbers, it's basically 2% all the way to the end of the decade. That's higher by 3 or 4 percentage points, or 30 or 40 basis points, than the average growth rate in Hawaii during the 20 years before the pandemic. So we're forecasting really robust, in my assessment, really robust growth in the out years, at least in terms of income. And most of that stuff about construction is what sort of makes me be a little worried about bringing our forecast down too much. Just the big difference between the results when using my inputs with the higher. I think my input for construction was 15%. Does anybody have a problem with 4.5% growth for the fiscal year?
I don't. I was thinking 4.6, but I'm good with that. 4.5.
So 4.5, so that's assuming that instead of negative 2.4% that we'll we'll turn that around to a positive 1 to 2%. Yeah.
Yep.
For the last 2 months. We can talk about this for other years too, but of course, there's been so much chaos lately with all the tariff information, and we're hearing about people making trade-offs, costs, afraid of costs, and they're being just cautious and not traveling and all of that. How do you see that affecting the numbers, Carl?
Well, like I said sort of earlier, I really see that as the next fiscal year issue, right? I mean,
Yeah. I think you're right.
you know, we have really big concerns, right? I mean, you saw our last forecast report.
Yeah.
I mean, we think we're going to be going into a recession, and a mild recession, but we actually think, you know, visitor arrivals and visitor spending and job counts are all going to start falling in the second half of this calendar year. You know, probably in our forecast, and then I actually looked today. I tried to do a quick update of our forecast based on the jobs data that we have, and it raised the forecast for the calendar year a little bit, but not dramatically, right? So our calendar year forecast for jobs was, I think it was 0.8% job growth for the whole year, and then negative for next year, and it raised it maybe 20 basis points. Just, you know, you're just starting at a higher point, and you know, right now it's not that different than where we were at our last meeting. We knew things were coming. We didn't know how crazy the tariff announcements were going to be, but right now it's still all soft data, right? It's all consumer sentiment and PMI, and you know, there's very, very little hard data that says the economy is weakening significantly.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's actually a pretty strong correlation between the soft data and the hard data. And that suggests that in coming months, we will see that weakness show up in the US labor market, in consumer spending. And so, yeah, I'm not sure that, I mean, my forecast for next fiscal year is not very pretty for tax collections. I think it's minus 3.5%, and that's, I don't know if that's above the line or below the line. It's not fully below the line, right? Because so it's only below the line in the sense that we have some data that includes the tax cuts that have already happened at the start of this year, but it doesn't anticipate the additional tax cuts coming in the next calendar year. I don't know if that made any sense or not. There's a lot of chaos, a lot more chaos to come, unfortunately.
Oh, wonderful.
Buckle your seatbelts.
Yeah.
And we also have, like, you know, this budget bill that's going through with these. There's a lot of uncertainty about tax cuts.
You mean the reconciliation bill? Yeah.
The reconciliation bill, whether, you know, wages will be taxed, overtime will be taxed. There's just a lot of unknowns that could actually be pretty stimulative to our local economy as well. You don't think so?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's definitely some stimulus there, but the problem is that it also includes, it includes the cuts to Medicaid and to SNAP benefits, and so the same people who might be benefiting from, say, not paying taxes on tips are potentially getting hit with lost Medicaid and reductions in SNAP benefits. I mean, the analysis that I've actually, CBO released an analysis, I think just this morning, that said that I think it was I can't remember if it was the bottom decile or the bottom quartile, would see a 2% hit to their income from the current version of the reconciliation bill in 2026, I think, and that would grow to a 4% hit and that primarily So it's equivalent to that size of a hit to their income because of the lost benefits, right? And because they see so little. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that extending the Trump tax cuts, the Tax Cuts and Job Act cuts, that's not stimulative. I mean, if you didn't extend them, that would be contractionary, but extending them doesn't, that's just sort of business as usual. So
As usual, yeah.
So it's really any other add-ons that we get. So I think that on net, it's a little bit stimulative that's a technical term.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Manini.
But the thing that I worry about actually is the thing that I think is sort of a significant risk is the bond market recognizes that we're being completely irresponsible when it comes to fiscal policy. And, imagine a 30-year bond rate that's at 6.5%. That's pretty scary.
Today was
And
kind of
then-
scary.
I'm not forecasting that.
Yeah. And then you
No, no.
and then you truly have crowding out, right? Because
Oh yeah.
there's no way you ever get cheap mortgages. Like at 4.5, it's expensive. But if you go to 5.5, that's because we have the treasuries are that.
Yeah.
It
No, it's
changes
scary.
everything. Yeah.
So
Much
have we
bigger
set up
down
any proposals on the number
impact.
for the current fiscal year?
Well, I
Well,
kind
I
of
do
threw out
think we
a
should-
floating 4.5.
Yeah, I
So,
do
but-
think that we should lower it a bit.
Yeah.
To take into account that we have been seeing lower collections in the last 3 months. So I'd be supportive of the 4.5, Carl.
So, but Carl, I would question that a little bit, just because I think, to your point, the numbers may be higher, because I just isolated, basically taking out the estate tax impact, right? So if I take it over 10 months rather than 12
Yeah.
months, right? So that means it's the increase is 1.79%. That's a change for 10 months. And then, if you're trying to get to that 4.6, I think that's about 10 million in general fund tax revenue. So that's basically, I think, a 1.6 million over the remainder of the next 2 months, about 800,000. And if you take out basically 262,000, which is the 1 month impact of that estate tax, that means you're really looking at, 540 million in tax revenue a month, which is even below last year's monthly average. So it seemed,
Scott, it sounded like you took out the estate tax twice.
well, so
Maybe
what
I
I did is I took the 8.4 million, then basically took what the impact of that estate tax would be, and took it out. So it'd be, 8.1 is where we would be, as if, the estate tax was coming in on an annual basis. So we're still going to get that, right? The 2.62 is coming in at some later date. So that's another 500 million
I
coming
see.
in.
I think
So
I
that
understand
means
what you're doing.
we're only looking at raising 1.1 million over the remaining 2 months, right? If you look at that from that perspective, because we're 1 point, in order to get to 10 million, which is 4.6, we would need $1.6 million of revenue. And if, I guess, well, maybe I am taking it out twice, now that I'm thinking about it. You could be right, Carl. Actually, I was taking it out twice. I'm sorry, Carl. It'd be 1.9. So yeah, 1.9.
That's how
So
you got the
basically-
750,
Yeah,
right? Which is
yeah.
1.5.
Yeah.
Dr. Kobe, you said the withholding gonna have what kind of impact on the remaining 2 months? The increase in the or the decrease in the withholding?
It'll be like 80
Well,
million.
you just can't average. You just can't take the behavior in the first half of the fiscal year and assume it's going to stay, because
Yeah,
the tax cuts hit in the second half, right?
yeah, it started January 1st, right? So we still haven't seen the impact for May and June.
I mean, I guess I have no doubt Seth's calculator makes sense. So we probably should work with that and ask ourselves whether, as Christie framed it, we can, switch from that rate of decline to that rate of increase. I mean, obviously we can. I mean, the swings can be massive.
Yes. There's a lot of
Yeah, it's either going to
There's
come in
randomness.
4.4 or 4.6. So 4.5 makes sense. And that would get us to about 9.94 billion.
Seth, can you throw up your table regarding the percentage changes? Because I thought, just to make it simple, because I'm pretty simple in my thinking, shouldn't it range somewhere in fit in? I guess he was mentioning it's in the blue bars, anywhere from -1% to -3%. Is that what it's saying, or?
That's what it's been averaging in the last 3 months. It's
Right, so
negative
then,
2.4.
the forecast, which is at 5, should, based on what he's telling me, range in a low 4% range or down to 3.9, somewhere in that range.
So to get to 5, we'd have to have swing from a negative 2.4% to a positive over 4% for the last 2 months. So it'd be a pretty big swing. Not that it couldn't happen, because we've seen strange things happen.
I mean,
So-
look at the difference in revenues that we're talking about. So take the 4.6% number on this table. That's 1.566 billion. And if you were at -2%, it's 1.5 billion. So I mean, these are really small changes.
Yep.
I'm comfortable with the 4.5. I think that is a bit aggressive, given just the recent history, but I don't feel comfortable continuing where we are.
Okay. I'm good with 4.5.
So do we have a proposal?
Mike, did that help, Mike? You're
Yeah,
still worried about the
kind of trying to figure this out. So I'm looking at this table, and it says that if fiscal year 2025, let's say at 2% hits 10 billion, that would be an overall growth rate of 4.6.
Yeah.
And then last year we are at 1.535 billion. And if we went to that 4.6% growth rate, we would have to generate 1.566 billion then.
Correct.
Okay, and then the overall discussion that just came across is that our growth rate has been positive. I mean, ultimately in the last couple months. So then,
No, it's been negative.
No, it's been negative.
It says 2.4, but it's a negative 2.4.
It's the earlier months that's bumping it up.
oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
That makes a difference, negative or positive, I guess.
Yeah, it does make a difference. That's what worries me. But we
Right,
have seen some
so-
big swings, so
So the proposed on a table is a 4.6% growth rate or a 4.5% growth rate, which would be slightly higher than we were last year.
Yeah, and so that's what it's saying is you're expecting to have the revenues for the next 2 months are going to be about between 1% and 2% larger than they were the previous year. That's what you're implying with that.
So to make it easy, since I never made a motion, I'll make a motion of 4.4%.
I'll second that motion. Quick.
That way we can actually use the table. So that suggests that revenue growth for the next 2 months will be 1% higher than a year earlier, which is, in my mind, the biggest drawback to that is the tax law, right? The reduced withholding. But there's close to 3% inflation, which ought to be generating, and there's at least with the April data, there was almost 3% job growth. And we're averaging 2% job growth and 3% inflation. In a normal world, we'd be thinking about 4 to 5% nominal tax revenue growth.
Right.
The other thing
And
is estimated taxes. It's a little bit, it's increasing for the individual and corporate. It's somewhat, I mean, it captures to some extent the profitability, but there's also capital gains in there too.
So Carl, you brought
yeah,
up,
we could actually end up with a whole bunch of capital gains tax revenue from people who were bailing out of the market a few months ago.
hey Scott, what's your thought on what Carl said about construction? Are you seeing people ordering ahead of time, so that would maybe contribute to the surge in general excise taxes, and then once tariffs hit, if they hit, then you see a drop off at that point?
It's kind of a mix from what we're seeing. I mean, I think a lot of contractors are kind of in a wait and see position. And it's hard for them because obviously the ones that did order some materials and pulled it forward. But it's not widespread. I think it's a lot of the contractors, because even if you purchase it, then you've got to store it someplace. And I think that's another huge cost, which I think that's why a lot of contractors are just saying, well, we'll wait and see, and potentially try to go back for a change order or whatnot. And talking with some, I know that some of the contracts now have economic consequence clauses in there, where basically if there's something like tariffs or something that happens to the market, that it does qualify potentially for a change order, and it's not it kind of qualifies as force majeure, right? So it's covered in that you could potentially share those costs with others. That's not widespread, so it's not every contract. But I think on larger ones where you would see some of this, I think that is starting to creep in. So going back to answer your question, is I haven't seen a lot of that pull forward, not yet at least.
Okay. And then Carl, the influence of construction on overall revenues, is there a relationship there in regards to a surge in construction?
Yeah, I don't know if Seth has the parameters from the model handy, but the model that council uses, construction has one of the largest impacts.
Right.
I mean, just to one way to frame it is that so my forecast that I gave the tax department was for 15% growth in construction for the fiscal year. The council mean forecast was around 8%. All of the other councils' mean forecasts were higher. Income, maybe except CPI. Visitor numbers were quite a bit higher. And so the council mean forecast for tourism was, I think it was 1.5%. Let's see, it's 2.28%, and my forecast was 0.7%. And still, with those differences, the model returned a forecast for me of I think it was 4.5 or 4.6%, compared with the council. Mine was 4.2, and the council mean was 2.7. So that's almost all because of construction. That has a huge effect. I don't know if it's accurate, but in the model, it's a big effect.
Mhm.
I would say it's construction has been what's buoying economic growth in the state, despite relatively low tourism rates for the last year and a half, right? So, and we've seen that, and that is bared out in the economic data.
I'm curious, how many of you bought something that you weren't necessarily going to buy because of potential tariffs? And my guess is that almost everybody here. And that's probably
did.
true in general. And that may in part explain some of the excise tax revenue, right? It's a little puzzling. If I remember correctly, the data from the Hawaii Automobile Association or what Auto Dealers Association, I think it's had suggested that wasn't happening, but that might have been early. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the sort of the window to do that sort of kept getting longer and longer with all the pauses. And so, I mean, even right now, you could potentially buy an automobile without any impact of tariffs, at least for the next few weeks. So, I mean, my hunch is that is showing up some in the data, and actually, we may not even have seen it yet because the excise tax data for April is actually March collections.
So we may hit that 1%.
All about 1% right now.
Okay. Any further discussion, or is everyone ready for a vote?
We only can be off by 100 million at 1% in the last 2 months, so it can't be that bad, right?
Yeah.
Hey, that would be good
We'll just have Carl contribute that. Yeah.
if we're only off by 100 million.
I'm
Any
ready
further
to vote.
discussion? Everyone ready? Okay, we'll take a vote. Vice Chairman Maynard. What's on the table? The motion is 4.5% for the
4.4%.
for the current fiscal year, fiscal 25.
Yes.
Vice Chairman,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham.
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu.
Aye.
So the vote carries unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the next fiscal year 2026. Dr. Bonham, you want to lead us off? You had some strong thoughts about the next year.
Yeah, it's scaring me here on this one.
Well, I mean, the most obvious thing about next year is no one knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, there's so much. I mean, you could concoct a story where in the next 2 months, tariffs globally go to zero, and the stock market booms because of it, and everything turns out wonderful. That seems a little unlikely. And in the forecast that we recently released, we have a mild recession starting second half of this year. You end up with, if I remember correctly, about 4 billion less visitor spending over 2 years. Is not that dissimilar to the size of actually it's bigger than the size hit we had from the Maui wildfires. And you put that together with the federal job cuts. I think we estimated 2,300 lost federal civilian jobs. We're already seeing that, but I don't think it's because of. I think it's probably attrition. It's a hiring freeze more than anything else, because it's probably still too early to see some of those cuts. And then job losses in a wide variety of sectors that are influenced by federal spending. And so when I took that forecast and submitted it, the council's model returned a forecast for next fiscal year of minus 2.8%.
Yikes.
Yeah. I mean, I that's why I led with the part about uncertainty. It feels hard to come up with a very optimistic scenario that's not just kind of wild. There is, I can't remember if it was Mike or someone mentioned the stimulative effects of the fiscal policy, and that's true. And there's deregulation and other things but those are mostly about longer term growth, right? That's really not about next fiscal year. If those are going to be stimulative, you could get when the tax bill passes assuming it passes, right? There's even, who knows? It may not pass, right? The Republicans in Congress might fight each other over it, and we could end up with a huge tax increase.
So Carl, just curious, what's your thoughts on GDP and how it's going to kind of continue on? Because my understanding when I first heard the GDP dropped, I was kind of shocked, thinking, okay, is this
Oh
a
yeah,
start of the
yeah,
recession?
yeah.
But my
No,
understanding
it's
is
not.
it's a mathematical
quirk.
calculation, right? Because
Yeah.
Imports exceeded significantly, and it was that, you think, because people were trying to get ahead of the tariffs, or?
I mean, I think that's some of it. There was also a big increase in gold imports, I think. And I don't recall, I'm not sure anybody ever came up with a good explanation. I mean, maybe that's flight to quality, who knows? So yeah, people have been talking about the likelihood, and we've heard casual reports, right? News reports about businesses stocking up on things. And so an import is a subtraction from GDP. Right. And so a surge in imports would bring the GDP number down. The numbers that we're seeing right now for second quarter, and it's early, it's real early. But if you looked at the Atlanta Fed nowcast for GDP for second quarter, it's positive 2% right now. The Moody's nowcast is 0. So there's a huge range, as you would expect this early in the quarter. But I don't think we're necessarily have already started the recession. It's really a situation where you've got the GDP number is negative, but the job numbers are still strong. And so, barring a big revision of the job numbers, it's not going to be called a recession. And this happened a year or two ago, right? Where we had I can't remember when exactly it was, and everybody was talking about, oh, well, we're having a recession because we had 1 quarter of negative GDP, but the job numbers were so strong, and it just kind of blew by.
And your definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth?
Well, no, I mean that's one definition, right? I mean the official definition is when the NBER says it's a recession, and they don't just look at GDP. They also look at GDI. They look at, basically what they're looking for is a broad-based decline in economic activity. And so if you don't have declining jobs and rising unemployment, it's pretty impossible for them to declare a recession. So actually, and there have been recessions before that didn't have 2 quarters of negative GDP growth.
So along those lines too, Carl, I'm just curious, I was hearing stories, well, this was, when the China tariffs were initially announced, about how the ports in LA were starting to slow down. Do you know, has that rebounded at all, or?
It has. I mean, so there's been a surge. I think now people trying to get ahead of what might still come, because we're at 30%. I think it's for 90 days, and
July 10th.
so there's still, we still don't know what's going to happen at the end of that period. So the last, I was looking at the data for April, and the year-over-year growth of ships going into LA was minus 30, minus 40% type numbers. And I saw a story. I haven't gone to look at the data. There's a website you can actually see the number of ships coming and going. But I did see a report in Bloomberg or somewhere that there had been a bounce back. The thing that it's a little weird with, I mean, the way that these announcements from the administration have been consumed in the press and in the markets, because 145% tariff basically meant no trade, right? I mean, that's just there's just no shipping going on, and but 30%. So if you do the math and you use the estimates of what a price increase in international trade would do to demand, the level of tariffs we're at right now, they're actually not that much smaller than they were before the drop from 145 to 30. They're still, the average effective tariff rate is probably still between 15 and 20%. And before all this started, we were at about 2.5%. So tariffs across, remember, outside of USMCA, right, the Mexico-Canada trade deal, and those goods are excluded. They're currently not subject to any penalty tariffs, but everybody else is essentially at 10%, which is roughly 5 times higher than the average before. So if you look at where things are right now, it would suggest that about half of trade would stop instead of all of it. So it's better. I think what's going on, the only way I can explain it is the market is taking this as a signal that this is the direction, right? That we're headed towards much, much lower rates. That's the only way I could understand why the markets have recovered as much as they have. And I'm not sure they're right. Right. If you look at other than the stock market, the bond market certainly isn't getting excited. And if you look at what have happened to oil prices, notwithstanding today's scare because of Israel and Iran, oil prices have been down, and not because we're drilling. It's not drill baby drill. It's, oh my gosh, the economy's falling. And so you've got two markets that are basically saying things are not good, and maybe, I don't know, maybe the stock market is looking forward to accelerated depreciation or some other benefit from the tax changes. If you look at data from surveys of businesses, the NABE survey of National Association of Business Economists, something like half of the respondents are saying that their sales are flat to falling. Many of them, of course, are telling us that they're going to be raising prices. I think the number was something like a third of respondents said that they were expecting to raise prices. Overall, if you look at if you look at the policy uncertainty index, which we've been following, we've never seen it shoot up like this. And I think I mentioned this last time, the small business uncertainty is at levels, some of the highest levels we've seen in the 30 or 40 years of the survey. And again, that's all soft data, but it's going to start showing up in the hard data.
So to summarize, you're saying that instead of our negative 2.3, it should be 2.8?
Well, this is what the tax model said when I used my inputs, and yeah, I don't know how to compare those two. I mean, I guess they should be comparables on. So it should be actually the comparison. What did the tax model say about? Let's see. Well, the mean, so if you plug in the mean forecast of all the members for fiscal 26, I'm looking at the forecast distribution. That gave us a forecast for fiscal 26 of 0.6%. Is that above the line, Seth, or below the line?
That's below the line, but it does not account for the weird estate tax payments.
So it's okay. So you would go from 0.6 to minus 2 point something because of the estate tax swing.
Yeah, about 2.6 to minus 2.4.
So whatever's in that table. Let's see, what page is the council's 2.25 is the current? No, that's the March 12 forecast. Estimates of general, is it table 6A? Oh, that's above the line. No, that's above the line, but without the estate tax. Do we have a table that has
The state tax in it? No, we don't.
okay. So the comparison, so if we were going to make a comparison between sort of the council mean forecast in the tax model, it would be 0.6%. And with my inputs, it's minus 2.8. Now, I'm not suggesting that we'd lower the forecast that much. But I don't think anybody would disagree that our forecast for next year might be a little too high as it stands. And I'll leave it to Christy to make a motion.
Well, I'm not sure what I would
Yeah.
suggest at this point, but Seth, how would you suggest we go forward with the above and below the line and the inheritance tax and all of that? How do we
Well, my
bring,
suggestion is the current forecast of negative 2.25% already involves the state tax payment. It also already involves everything. It's below the line. So however your
Start
view
there.
has changed from March to now is how much I would change that
Okay.
the forecast.
Mhm.
So if
That
you
makes
think
sense.
the world is like 1% worse in fiscal year 26 and from what you've learned over the past 8 weeks, then you lower it to, negative 3.25.
Wow.
is it 1% worse, Carl?
I think it is.
I thought you were saying it's worse, 2% worse.
I think it's that too.
Seth, sorry, just to clarify. So if I look at table 6A, right, that's reflecting the mean forecast of 0.6% growth, which results in general fund of 9.8 billion, right? If I look
What table are you looking at?
6A,
Okay.
and then if I go back to table 5A, which was our last forecast, that's still the 9.8 billion, but a growth rate of a negative 2.25, right? And that's because of the 5% growth for 2025. Is that what it is? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
right. So you're growing greater on what your current forecast is you're going to have negative growth on a high base, and what the model is predicting is you actually have a lower base but then higher growth after that.
So 5B might be a good table to look at.
Yeah, you can look at 5B. Again, you guys have done all the hard work. I would just reason from what your current forecast is, right?
Mhm.
So if you really think what you've learned is like 1% worse in the last 8 weeks, then you just lower it from whatever you have, the negative 2.25. You reason from there because you've already done the hard work of including the state tax payments, the tax cuts.
So to put some perspective on it, that's maybe easier for us to think about, sort of in purely economic terms. The difference between the inputs that I submitted that got me to that, what was it, minus 2.8, I think, in the tax model, and what the council mean is that got to the 0.6% in model 1. The input I submitted for fiscal 26 for real income is 0. And the council submitted 2%, 2.16%. I submitted minus 0.1%. My construction completed for fiscal 26 is 0. Council has 5%. My CPI is 4.8%. That's not that helpful. visitor expenditure is minus 0.7%. The council submitted 1.5%. So what I'm trying to do is sort of help explain why my number is so much lower than the council's, because the inputs that I submitted are, 2 percentage points less, basically no real income growth at all. And the council is thinking real income growth of over 2%. And I have a decline in visitor spending. The council has positive visitor spending. So if the council doesn't, if the council thinks I'm too pessimistic, then that minus 2.8 is way too low.
But that's minus 2.8 without the estate tax calculation.
I don't
So
know
is it
anymore.
minus 5%?
I would have to ask Seth again. The
Yes,
summary
it
of members'
is.
forecasts is without the estate tax.
Without the estate tax.
Yeah. So that explanation is even, I mean, that shows you what, a 2% swing, 200 basis point swing in real income growth, and it's more than 200 basis point swing in visitor spending will do to the forecast. It's almost a 500 basis point swing in construction across the. I would say
Yeah.
of that. I mean, it sounds awfully pessimistic, and maybe it's too much, but we were trying to account for including cuts to federal spending that haven't even been announced yet.
But it sounds like minus 2.25, which is what we have, is if you take Carl's plus 3% for estate planning or estate taxes, we are not pessimistic enough in our minus 2.25.
I don't think anybody would disagree with that. The only question is
How far?
How much lower do we want to go? Is it 1%?
Right.
Is it 100 basis points? I mean,
and just to let you know, the real personal income growth of 2% growth is a pretty rosy. It's a pretty rosy scenario.
Yeah, the average over the 20 years leading to before the pandemic was 1.7,
Right.
and that was a period of time when we still had population growth.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's too high. But whether it actually turns negative, that's a whole nother ball game. So the other thing to keep in mind, and I probably shouldn't say this, but we're going to get another chance at this forecast with more clarity on the budget. And
this one may matter because if they do a special session, this is what they're going to use.
Yep.
I'm willing to bet that we'll have another shot at it.
If it happens
it's
after September.
It's happened before.
Yeah.
I think it was post. I can't remember. I think it was post 9/11. We got called into a special meeting to update the forecast. Does anybody remember that? No one was here but me. Kurt might. You're on mute, Kurt.
Kind of vaguely remember something like that.
Yeah. I just remember Paul Brubaker getting really upset that we had to come in and do another forecast, and he was annoyed because he didn't think we had any data to work with, and he was probably right. But I think this time we will, right? I mean, look, in a month or two, we're going to have a lot more information about what's going to happen with that tax bill.
Mm-hmm. Well, instead of minus 2.2, should we do something like minus 3.5? Just throwing that out there. Instead of minus 5, which would be Carl's forecast.
Hey, I'm all in on minus 3.5.
Wow.
Particularly because it was Christie's motion.
I didn't actually. I'm just throwing it out there for discussion. Is it? I mean,
So in your perspective, Carl, in terms of the lack of job growth or the potential job growth, if we took all those jobs that the federal government are cutting and stuck them into state positions that I know Governor Green and everybody else is looking to try to replace state employees, do we end up with, kind of a wash in that regard, or do we look at these federal jobs are extremely high paid, so a significant negative impact on our personal income taxes?
I mean, clearly, the average. I did the math on this, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but the average labor earnings, it includes benefits for federal civilian workers, is something like $20,000 or $30,000 a year more than the average labor earnings per person for state and local government workers. So it would be a big hit. But I understand. I understand why we would do that, and it's actually, I just don't know where the state's going to get the money, and whether the city's going to get the money, because the state's going to be dealing with all the other repercussions of the federal cuts.
Yep.
Right? I mean, there's only so much money in the budget, and if we're having to deal with Medicaid cuts, I mean, I would assume that the state's going to make up the vast majority of any federal pullback in Medicaid, and so we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars just for that and for SNAP benefits. So are we going to come up with? I mean, the good news is the state's in a really good position fiscally, right? I don't remember what's in the rainy day fund. I think it's $1.5 billion, something like that. It's a lot of money. So, maybe maybe what I said was too strong. There's a lot of money there to help us weather the storm. So the other question is whether those people want to go to work for the state, and take the pay changes. And of course, there's skill matches too, right? If you're a biologist who's working, to protect Hawaii from invasive species, and you're being paid on a federal grant, or you're a cancer researcher being paid on a federal grant, there's not necessarily a job waiting in state government for you. Okay, I'll make the motion. Minus 3.5% for this fiscal year.
Or for fiscal year 26, right?
That's what I meant. Yes, thank you.
Any second?
I second. Wendell.
Second. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll take a vote. Vice Chair Meaner,
I hope we get there. I'll say
Yeah, I
aye.
do too.
Dr. Bonham,
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu,
Aye.
Okay, so the vote carries unanimously.
Aye, aye, aye.
Negative 3.5% for fiscal year 2026. Okay, the next topic on the agenda is the remaining fiscal 5 years, fiscal 27 to 31.
We just adjust that down by 125 basis points each one.
Well, if you think next year is uncertain,
So one thing that I'm kind of going backwards, but drops of more than 1% in general fund tax revenues are actually very rare.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at the calendar year data, and we've had, since 1980, we've had 3 times when tax revenue, when the general fund has fallen by more than, say, 2%, 2.5%. And in all except the financial crisis, the following year was a bounce back, positive. Not necessarily huge, but I mean, bigger, the bigger the drop, the bigger the bounce back. So after the financial crisis in 2009, revenues fell almost 13%. They bounced back 7%. In the 90s, when we had several years of really weak growth, we also had big tax changes. We had, like in 99, we had almost a 2% decline, and the next year was 8% growth. So I'm not sure that we would necessarily do like what Window was just tossing out there.
Just until 2028.
Yeah.
Well, I think the negative for next year, where we have it, is really flat if we take out the estate taxes, right?
Yeah, good point.
So it's not as though it's maybe not like a weakness that we're recovering from.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's different about this, right? Is we have continual reduction in the tax collections because of the tax law. Is it straight line, Seth? I can't remember. I mean, do we get any pauses in the?
We do next year. Well, I mean, the magnitude of the changes varies from year to year. The really big changes occur when there's the tax bracket changes, which is 25, 27, and 29. Just as a reminder, it's in your booklets, but the size of the tax, the increase, and this is really important, right? So if you look at your brackets, it shows the implication for the loss of revenue is next year because of tax law changes, which includes individual income tax benefit and also tax cut, and also the GET exemption on Medicaid is 630 million, but that's over 200. Like that's above the change that occurred this year, which is 240 million, right? So what I'm saying is the loss in revenue, the year-to-year loss in revenue is 400 million. So that's not insignificant.
Okay.
It's about 4%, right?
Wow.
So one question to you, I mean, the uncertainty is there, but rolling forward, the conference I was just at, one of the, for basically engineers, so looking at construction, but one of the topics that came up was with regard to next year being the midterms, and that if the economy does hit a recession, the discussion has been that some of the hardline Republicans are going to flip. They have to if they want to get reelected. So should we be considering any of that within our forecast, or is it just, once again, that's so uncertain that we don't even go there? Because that could have a big impact. I mean, it might reverse some of these cuts and other types of things. And yeah, obviously they still have to pay for it in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, we're going to get downgraded again. But should we be looking at any of that when forecasting out further, like 27 in later years?
Can that guardrail control the president?
Yeah, I mean I mean, we talk about the same thing, and my guess is that it'll be too late for them by then. I mean, if they go forward with the reconciliation package and the tariffs stay anywhere near the 10, it seems to me like we're probably stuck with 10% tariffs on most countries, and probably some kind of penalty tariffs on China. That's my personal guess. And it's based on things that Bessent and others had said. It feels like they want tariff revenue as part of their scheme, and they honestly seem to believe that these are great policies. And so we're going to end up with higher prices, and we're going to end up with people losing healthcare benefits. I'm not sure there's not going to be much that they can do before the midterms to salvage themselves. And then the flip side is they've already done the tax cut. I mean, I can't imagine we're going to see any fiscal response to a weak economy. But you know, we don't have a forecast for a U.S. recession yet. I mean, that's not, and you know, normally tariffs are not normally something you would think of as causing a recession. I mean, of course, this size of shock is so large that it's sort of completely out of the realm of comprehension. But you know, normally you wouldn't say that a tariff increase is a recession inducing. You know, you end up with substitution and prices rise, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a collapse of the economy. Not sure we're making a whole lot of progress here. I mean, in our when I input our assumptions, our forecasts, we basically, you know, we have this pretty sizable hit in next fiscal year, and then the next several fiscal years are extremely weak. I don't know what even came out of the tax model. Basically 0 and 0 in 27 and 28. So that's awfully weak. I'm not sure I believe that. In fact, I don't believe that because I do think you'll get some bounce back. But it's very plausible, I think, that we could have 2 years of weak performance. And you know, the something we talked about a lot and we didn't really have any resolution on is there's been all this discussion about Canadian visitors eschewing the US. And you can see it you can see it in the travel data, not the travel data that's being reported in the press, because some of that seems to be mumbo jumbo, but Stats Canada actually reports the number of Canadians returning to Canada from the US by car and by plane. And those numbers are down sharply. And it isn't obvious yet in the Hawaii data. And the seats outlook is no worse than it was last year, which was pretty lousy. I think the Canadian seats outlook was down something like 10% last year, and it continues that way. So it doesn't look like it's gotten any worse. But those are some of the wild cards that we worried a lot about was perceptions, and you know, there've been stories. There was a story the other day of some European hikers that got detained in Hawaii by border patrol. I didn't follow the story. I just saw the headline somewhere. So those kinds of things are sort of wild cards that worries us.
Yeah, and also the other wild card where everybody just around the world is not going to buy as much American products. They're just there's a stain.
Yeah, and that's you know, we're starting to get hard data on. I actually have talked to a local CEO who and they have an international brand, like a world famous brand of a product that saw an immediate drop in sales to Canadians.
Yep.
It's something, you know, this is like an iconic brand, and it's kind of like, you know, if Gucci all of a sudden saw a 20% drop in sales to Canada, and you know, you wouldn't think that in my mind, I would have thought that iconic brand was sort of separate from the US. It was really, you know, a global brand, not a US brand, but they're getting hit.
Yep.
And I've sort of operated under the assumption that Hawaii is different, but my colleagues disagree with me, and we argued about this for quite a bit.
Unfortunate.
But the bookings data we have right now through the next several months doesn't suggest any big changes in in the tourism picture. But then we haven't seen the price increases yet on U.S. consumers, right? They're going to start showing up in the coming weeks. I mean, there's some of them, right? You're beginning to see them trickle in. So the question is, a year from now, if prices of everything are 100 to 200 basis points higher than they would, or inflation is 100 to 200 basis points higher, and income growth has stagnated and business profits are weakening, and presumably the stock market doesn't keep doing what it's been doing for the last month, will people be traveling to Hawaii in the same way and spending money the same way?
So Carl, you mentioned that your booking data is showing that it's kind of staying constant.
Yeah.
So is it primarily domestic travelers, do you know, or is it international, or is it
Well,
still
the
the
bookings
combination?
data, I don't have it by.
Okay.
I mean, I do from another source. Yeah, I can. But look, I mean, the bulk of these visitors are domestic visitors. That hasn't changed. Right? It's something like 75 to 80% of visitors to Hawaii right now are domestic visitors.
And I guess that plays in if, inflation continues to rise and costs of the, then
Yeah.
that would impact the travel. Obviously, that's going to be one of the biggest things hit. Recreational travel and travel to Hawaii is more expensive than driving someplace. So
yeah.
That would
And
happen.
the thing that, I mean, I'd say the most optimistic thing that's happened in the last 6 weeks is the rebound in the stock market. Because that, I mean, really, I was pretty worried when we were, looking at, I can't remember where we bottomed out. Double-digit drops in the stock market translates into, something like a 0.5 percentage point drop in consumption. And it tends to impact, we talked about this last meeting, I think. It tends to impact the highest income households most directly, and they tend to do most of the consumption. And obviously the typical visitor to Hawaii is not a low income household, so that was a big concern. And I'm puzzled by the stock market, so I'll leave it at that.
So where are we? It's good.
We're trying to avoid a number.
My forecast was pretty flat.
Yeah.
For 2020, where are we? 2027.
Currently, you're at 2.9, 2.5, 2.6, 1.9, and 3.1.
So we dropped the current year from 5 to 4.4. The next fiscal year, we dropped from 2.25 to 3.5, right?
From negative 2.25 to negative 3.5.
Negative 2.5. So the base has gone down between this year and next year.
Yeah.
And the current model is showing us at, I guess the mean forecast is 2.1. Is that right, Seth, for 2027?
Mean forecast for 2027 is
Table 6A.
2.1, right?
And we were at 2.9. Is that right? Prior last
Right.
meeting.
Yeah.
What table are you guys looking at?
Table 1 at the bottom.
Table 5B and table 6A.
Yeah.
So the consensus dropped the 2020.
Yeah, but like for fiscal, I would just reason from where you guys are, because okay, so 2.1, if you look at the absolute number, it's $10 million, right? Or 10 billion, I'm sorry. The estimate for fiscal year 2021 is not anywhere close to $10 billion right now, or it is a little close, but it's lower because you've lowered the base several. So you gotta make sure you're always using the same, your reasonings from the same numbers. Either you do the growth rates or you do the absolute rates. Choose one.
Right. Christy, what's your forecast for fiscal 27? Which number
My
are you?
forecast was zero growth. So
You're member 7?
I think it's anonymous.
Remember.
Carl. But yeah.
Oh, write that down.
But yeah, I was a little bit pessimistic.
Yeah, you were almost as pessimistic as me.
I know, it scares me.
Yeah. Except I had a bounce in fiscal 29 and you didn't. About 1%.
I'd be okay with one.
We're going from 2.9 down to 1%.
Mhm.
Well, I was going from 2.1 to 1, but
What about the other years, the further out years?
I'd be more willing to go higher for those, 2 or 3%. Maybe 1.1% for 2027 and then 2% for the other years. Just throwing it out there.
so in my forecast, I'm member 2, just so you know, in the summary of members forecast. So I had 0.8% in fiscal 2028 and then 2.4 in fiscal 29. And then I don't know why the wobbles are out there in the out years. I guess I wouldn't necessarily change fiscal 29, 30, and 31.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I would raise fiscal. I don't think I would. Yeah. So we were talking about 1% for fiscal 27.
Right.
And I would be inclined to make fiscal 28 less than 2%.
I'm good with that.
Do 1.5%.
So 1.5, and then maybe leave the rest of the years alone. I don't know why 30 is 1.9 and 31 is 3.1.
Well, I think those are because of tax law changes, aren't they?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So 1%, 1.5, and then leave the rest.
That's the start.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
A second.
Any further discussion? So the motion is for fiscal 2027 at 1%. Fiscal 28 was at 1.5%.
Correct.
And then the remaining years, the same growth rate as we previously projected.
Correct.
2.6% for fiscal 29, 1.9% for fiscal 30, 3.1% for fiscal 31.
Right. But of course, those increases are off a lower base, right?
Yeah. Any discussion? Any further discussion?
I'd like to ask a question. Since you've been on the board a lot longer than I have, in the years where there are presidential elections, does the economy typically, I mean, I would imagine the government will want to spur economic growth so that they could get reelected. So
boost,
I'm
yeah.
thinking, if it's 2028, 1.5% is not a significant amount of growth. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there to let you think about that.
Mhm.
Because the next election would be when? It would be November, first Tuesday, November 28, right? So that
That
would
would
be
actually be fiscal year 2029.
29, right? But it would start in 28, at the tail end of 28. Yeah.
That's interesting.
But but we're not gonna have a re-election, right? It'll be a new.
Oh, an inauguration, not a, I mean, a coronation, not an election.
It will be
I'm not
a-
sure that this necessarily would translate to federal level. I mean, the typical way that you think about a political business cycle, I mean, it's both fiscal and monetary, but I'm not sure there's going to be much room at the federal level for any fiscal stimulus. The way you could end up with this is President Trump's going to get to appoint the next Fed chair. And, depending on who that is, we could end up with a boost from lower interest rates, no matter how misguided it might be at the time. So that, I think that's potentially real. But the state level, the thing that strikes me is just whether we see the kind of CIP spending that you could, I mean, so imagine if the stadium goes forward and a whole bunch of the work on housing goes forward in Evelay, and that there's potentially some pretty significant work that could happen if the legislature doesn't get spooked by bond ratings, and usually what happens is they talk about counteracting the weakness by spending more for construction, and then they end up not doing it because they pull back because they're worried about their bond rating. And I don't think CIP in the state is normally actually counter-cyclical. Good question, though.
Yeah.
What did we
Another
decide
issue-
for 26? Is it for fiscal 26?
Negative 3.5.
3.5.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Negative 3.5, I thought we decided.
and most of that coming from the estate tax
Yeah.
bump.
And Mike, another reason why these numbers look low is because of the tax cut law, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
these are
Yeah,
actually
right.
not that. I mean, they're not. I wouldn't say they're booming numbers, but they're not. They're not. They're better than what they appear to be.
Yeah.
In other words, we should be lowering the forecast further. That's what Seth's trying to tell us. I mean, it is a little challenging, right? Because we're seeing them go down, but a big chunk of that is because of the tax law changes, not
Hopefully-
the economic.
Hopefully that a lot of it gets spent also in the economy.
Yeah.
Any more
Yeah.
discussion? We're looking at fiscal 2027 at 1%, fiscal 28 at 1.5%. And the last 3 years stay the same as our prior forecast.
Yeah.
0.6%, 1.9, and 3.1%. Okay, we'll take a vote. Vice Chair Miner,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham.
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
I
Councilmember Hamasu.
Aye.
The vote carries unanimously. So the general fund forecast will be 1% growth rate for fiscal 27, 1.5% for fiscal 28, and the final 3 fiscal years, the growth rate remains the same as our prior forecasts. Okay. Next item on
What did we adopt for the current fiscal year? Was it
4.4, right? 4.4.
4.4. Yeah.
4.5, or is it? Did you guys do 4.4?
4.4.
I think I
4.4.
changed it to 4.4.
Yeah,
Okay.
4.4.
Next item on the agenda is the report by Budget and Finance.
Hi, aloha, Chair, Council members. This is Greg Hiratagoto at the Department of Budget and Finance. We have provided you with our report of revised projections for the general fund non-tax revenues, non-tax or non-general fund tax and non-tax revenue since the March 12th meeting. The revenue estimates were prepared by the executive departments and the judiciary and OHA in April and were based on point-in-time assumptions made by the program and department staff. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
Sorry. Are you able to see the screen right now?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Okay, so the first table I'd like to highlight is on table 2A, which is the general fund projections from sources other than tax. I have only one thing to highlight. There was in this repayment of loans and advances, there's actually a $11 million adjustment up in FY26. That's due to I guess, a loan repayment from the Convention Center Enterprise Special Fund back to the general fund. So that will happen in FY26. Next one is on table 3A. And this is the special revenue fund, special tax revenues. This one is showing here that we have a transfer for it's the same one we had in the last quarter's report where based on the council's projections for GET, general excise tax or transfer of general excise tax, the mass transit special fund will actually go down a bit. So it's throughout the rest of the fiscal year starting in FY25. They range from 10 million in FY26, fiscal year 26, and they actually go up to 26 million in fiscal year 30 and been back down to negative 14.6 million in FY 2031. And that's based on what the council had projected last quarter. The next one I like to highlight is the special revenue funds. This one is not that big a change. It's just the change for the charges for current services and utilities. This is due to a down revision of what the DOT thinks they will be getting from airline landing fees in the fiscal years from FY 27 or 25 to 31. So that's this line here.
Any
And the
idea
last,
where they came up with that number?
It's interesting.
I'm not sure. I could inquire on that if you want me to. But yeah, they had just done a down revision of, I guess, what the airlines will be paying into the, I guess, the DOT airport special fund.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, last highlight I have is actually for the table 5A. The highlight I like to here is in the federal grants. Kind of have a large revision in the out years. Actually, it was just a correction because DOD had stated that for the Maui wildfire grant, they had projected that the debris cleanup was going to be coming out of a grant, but actually it is actually being paid directly from FEMA. So there was actually a close to over $1 billion reduction in this amount here. So that's kind of a big change. And then other than that, I think there was also a big change in FY25 due to a grant that the DHHL, Department of Hawaiian Homelands, had for I guess they have a new grant for broadband access. So I guess it was for $72 million. So that's what's causing a uptick in the federal grants in FY20. It should be 25. I guess there's a washout from the DoD grant. And that's all I had to highlight.
Excuse me, mentioned $1 billion. I'm trying to find it on this.
Yes. So
Where
it's over the entire out year
Spread out,
projection.
yeah.
It's spread
I
out.
see. Okay,
And most
thank
of it is being reflected inside the last 3 years. So
Okay.
it'll
I
be
see.
in this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Mr. Hirohata Goto, you said FEMA's going to directly pay the money rather than it coming through the state special fund.
Yeah. So actually, it's a federal grant that was recorded previously. So they're just correcting that grant they had inputted into our system.
Is there any risk that, with regard to FEMA, and the latest news is that it's, 50-50 state contribution potentially, is there any risk that, this money, the state will be back on the hook for it?
We are currently watching. We're not sure about what the full impact of what the federal grant cuts will be. I cannot give any suggestion of whether or not they will do any clawbacks, but hopefully not.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Any motion to approve the BNF report?
So moved.
Second,
Thank you.
We'll take a vote. Vice Chair Baynard,
aye.
Dr. Bonham.
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu.
Aye.
Okay, so the BNF report is approved unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hirohata Goto.
Thank you.
Last item on the agenda is the next meeting, which will be a total personal income forecast. And I guess a number of us are up for also reappointment, right? I think 4 of us, right? Yeah. Other than the governor's appointments. So
Yep,
I'm trying to
correct.
remember. Oh, you're
Speaker, I think Speaker and Senate President appointments, I think, are up for renewal.
yeah. Okay.
I think that's right. So that should be 4 people.
Okay.
That would be.
So in Councilmember Hayashi and Councilmember Lee, there's a new speaker, right? That you have to have.
Yep.
Have you guys both approached the speaker about being reappointed?
I've been approached to continue.
Okay, good.
He reached
Is
out.
there something in the law that encourages reappointment of existing members for continuity purposes and institutional knowledge? Okay. So the next meeting will be for total personal income forecast. When is our report due, Dr. Kobe?
August 5th.
August 5th. Okay. That is that's a Tuesday. Dr. Bonham, any key reports that we might be waiting for in July or early August?
What's the date again?
August 5th, which would be a Tuesday. That's the reporting date.
Oh, okay. So end of July, well, I mean, we'll have the end of fiscal year visitor data by end of July. And let's see. But that would be the very end of July. Oh, well, the other thing is I'm out of town. Oh, no, I'm back by then. Let's see. Data. I got to see my data calendar. Data releases. No, nothing unusual.
Okay. Would we have the visitor data by the afternoon of July 31st?
Almost certainly. It's almost always released in the last 2 to 3 days of the month.
Okay. How is Thursday, July 31st at 2 p.m. for everyone?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Good for me.
Works for me.
Okay. So the next meeting on total personal income forecast, if everyone can make it, will be Thursday, July 31st at 2 p.m. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. So said you send a letter, draft letter to Christina.
Yeah, I'll get it to you tomorrow morning.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget.
Bye-bye.
Don't forget the uncertainty language.
Yeah.
Yeah. About for every year or for which?
Well, certainly for the next 2 to 3.
Yeah. Okay.
See ya. Thanks.
That
Okay.
always applies, but even more so now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess I'll
Okay,
see you
thanks.
tomorrow, Seth.
A lot of uncertainty, not just
Yeah.
uncertainty.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
See you tomorrow.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.